The summer of 1945 was a season unlike any other in human history. Across the Pacific, the war had consumed everything men, cities, nations, and even humanity itself. But while the world watched Japan crumble under the weight of relentless bombings, deep within secret American laboratories, something even more devastating was being prepared, something that never reached its intended target. Few people today realized there was a third atomic bomb fully assembled, primed, and waiting. Its destination had already been discussed. Its use had already been authorized in principle. And if not for a few critical days in August 1945, the world might have seen a third mushroom cloud rise over Japan. But to understand how close we came to that reality, we have to go back to the beginning, to the dawn of the nuclear age. In 1939, as Europe was sliding into chaos, scientists warned the United States government that Nazi Germany was working on a new kind of weapon, one that could unleash the power locked inside the atom. That warning led to what became known as the Manhattan Project, a sprawling, secret effort that would involve over 130,000 people across the US, the United Kingdom, and Canada. The goal was clear: build an atomic bomb before the Germans did. But as the war in Europe ended in May 1945, Hitler was dead, Berlin had fallen, and Germany had surrendered. The race was over, but the bomb was ready. Now the question became, should it still be used? And if so, against whom? At that time, Japan was refusing to surrender. Despite relentless firebombing raids that turned Tokyo and dozens of other cities into ash, the imperial government vowed to fight to the bitter end. The Japanese military planned for a massive homeland defense, one that could cost millions of lives on both sides. President Harry Truman, who had only taken office a few months earlier after Franklin Roosevelt's sudden death, was thrust into the most consequential decision any leader had ever faced. He was briefed about the bomb shortly after becoming president, and he quickly realized its potential to end the war. On the 16th of July 1945, in the remote desert of New Mexico, the first atomic bomb was detonated. The Trinity test lit up the early morning sky with a blinding flash. A mushroom cloud rose 7 miles into the air. The blast was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Observers stood in silence, some cheering, others horrified. The weapon worked. Just weeks later, on August 6th, the B-29 bomber Enola Gay dropped Little Boy, a uranium-based bomb, over the city of Hiroshima. Within seconds, a fireball erased the city center. Tens of thousands were killed instantly. By the end of the year, the death toll had risen to over 100,000. 3 days later, on August 9th, another bomber, Boxcar, released Fat Man, a plutonium bomb, over Nagasaki. Again, devastation beyond comprehension. But what most people don't know is that even as these two bombs were dropped, preparations for a third were already well underway. In the chaos of those August days, US, Army Air Forces, and Manhattan Project officials were not waiting to see how Japan would respond. Production lines at Los Alamos and the Hanford site were working around the clock. New plutonium cores were being fabricated, and the next bomb's components were nearly complete. This was no theoretical weapon. It was real, a physical object taking shape inside heavily guarded facilities. Engineers had already begun assembling the parts. The scientists knew it would be ready soon. The third bomb, like Fat Man, was a plutonium implosion type design. But this one was expected to be more refined, more reliable, potentially even more destructive. According to official records, the bomb would have been ready for delivery between August 17 and the 20th of August 1945. The plan was already in motion. Target cities were still under discussion. The US had to list 5 main targets drawn up months earlier: Hiroshima, Kokura, Niigata, Kyoto, and Nagasaki. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were already gone. Kyoto had been spared, personally removed from the list by Secretary of War Henry Stimson, who had fond memories of visiting the ancient city before the war. That left Kokura and Niigata as potential next targets. President Truman, meanwhile, had made no public commitment to stop. He told his advisors the bomb would continue to be used as made ready until Japan surrendered unconditionally. Behind closed doors, the message was chillingly clear. If Japan didn't surrender soon, more atomic bombs would follow, and this third bomb was not a distant future project. In the days following Nagasaki, the US Army Air Forces sent cables to Los Alamos demanding updates. The next bomb should be ready for transport within 10 days. Crews at Tinian Island, the base used for both Hiroshima and Nagasaki missions, were already preparing. But fate, history, and timing intervened. As Nagasaki burned, Japan's leaders gathered in Tokyo. Emperor Hirohito, facing the unimaginable destruction of his nation, made the unprecedented decision to surrender. It was not unanimous military hardliners wanting to fight on, but the emperor's voice, heard in a crackling radio broadcast on the 15th of August, 1945, declared that Japan must endure the unendurable and accept defeat. Had that decision been delayed by just a few more days, even a week, the world might have witnessed a third atomic detonation. The bomb was that close to completion. But Truman's decision regarding its use was not as simple as it appeared. Behind the scenes, he faced enormous pressure from his generals, from scientists, and from the growing political implications of this new weapon. After Nagasaki, when reports began to arrive, detailing the unimaginable suffering, the burns, radiation sickness, and destruction, Truman reportedly became uneasy. On August 10th, he instructed the War Department that no further atomic bombs should be dropped without his explicit approval. By then, the third bomb was nearly ready. All it needed was a target and a presidential order. Yet even as the order to halt came down, the production did not stop entirely. The scientists at Los Alamos continued to refine their process. New cores were being produced, the bomb factories were still operational, the machinery of the atomic age had already begun turning, and it would never stop again. So, where exactly would that third bomb have fallen? What made President Truman hesitate? And what secrets did the US military keep hidden about this weapon that never saw use? Because buried within declassified documents, years after the war, there were hints, names of cities, coded cables, and discussions among generals that suggested the world came dangerously close to seeing one more mushroom cloud in August 1945. The truth about the third bomb isn't just a story about warfare, it's a story about human limits, moral questions, and a decision that changed the course of history. The bomb existed, the plane was ready, the crews were waiting, and yet, somehow, the world was spared barely. But the story doesn't end there, because the existence of that third bomb and the question of where it was meant to fall opens up a darker, more complex truth about the dawn of the nuclear age. The real secret wasn't just that America had another bomb. It was that it intended to make dozens more. Plans were already underway to continue atomic strikes well into the fall of 1945 had Japan refused to surrender. And as the war ended, the bomb that never dropped became the foundation for something even larger, the beginning of the Cold War, the nuclear arms race, and an era where humanity would live forever under the shadow of annihilation. But for now, imagine those few days in mid-August 1945, the silence between Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the world holding its breath, unaware that a third bomb was waiting, ready to fall. When Nagasaki was engulfed in flames on August 9th, 1945, the US military didn't stop to grieve or reflect. Orders were already circulating for the next mission. The scientists at Los Alamos were told to keep the production lines moving. The B-29 crews stationed at Tinian Island remained on alert. Nobody knew when or where the next atomic strike would happen, only that it would, unless Japan surrendered immediately. The war planners expected to use a third bomb by late August. In one official cable dated August 10th, the US Army's acting chief of staff, General Thomas Handy, wrote that another atomic bomb would be ready for delivery on or about the 17th or 18th. Everything was moving fast almost mechanically, as if the most powerful weapon ever created had become just another line on the schedule of war. The target? That's where the mystery deepens. According to multiple sources, the next bomb was initially meant for Kokura, a city in southern Japan that had already been the primary target for the Nagasaki mission. But on the morning of August 9th, thick clouds and smoke from nearby bombings covered Kokura, obscuring visibility. After 3 failed bombing runs, the B-29 Boxcar turned toward its secondary target Nagasaki, and history changed course. Had the skies over Kokura been clear that day, it would have been Kokura, not Nagasaki, forever etched in memory as the second city destroyed by an atomic bomb. And so, when the next bomb was being prepared, Kokura returned to the top of the list. But other names were also being discussed. Niigata, a port city on the Sea of Japan, was another potential target. It had shipyards, oil facilities, and rail connections, the kind of infrastructure the military wanted to cripple. Yet, there was hesitation. Niigata was far north, making it difficult for bombers to reach and return safely. There were even early drafts of plans mentioning Tokyo, though these were quickly dismissed. The capital, it was argued, was already devastated by conventional firebombing, and the psychological effect of destroying another cultural symbol like the Imperial Palace might have been counterproductive, especially if the US hoped to secure a quick surrender. Still, behind the scenes, President Truman's position began to shift. By August 10th, the human cost of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had begun to reach Washington. Photographs, telegrams, and first-hand reports described entire neighborhoods flattened, hospitals burned, civilians vaporized in an instant. Doctors spoke of strange symptoms, skin peeling, hair falling out, deaths that came days after exposure. No one fully understood radiation yet. It was horror beyond imagination. That same day, Japan sent a message through diplomatic channels signaling it was willing to surrender, but only if the emperor could remain on the throne. Truman hesitated. He wanted unconditional surrender, but he also saw an opportunity to end the war without more bombs. He gathered his advisors. Some pushed for a third strike to pressure Japan into submission. Others, including Secretary of War Henry Stimson and General Dwight Eisenhower, argued that Japan was already defeated and that using more atomic bombs would stain America's moral standing. The debate was fierce. But even as Washington argued, work on the third bomb continued. At Los Alamos, scientists had already completed the plutonium core, the heart of the weapon. Its assembly began around August 11th. Physicist Robert Bacher recalled that the bomb was well along in the process of being made ready. The explosive lenses, the intricate explosives that surrounded the core to trigger implosion, were being machined with precision. The bomb casing, similar to Fat Man's, was waiting for shipment. Over at Tinian Island, crews were preparing the next B-29 for the mission. The aircraft would have likely come from the 509th Composite Group, the same elite squadron that carried out the previous 2 strikes. They had spare planes already modified to carry atomic weapons. In other words, the operation could be executed within days, not weeks. Meanwhile, Truman faced mounting pressure from military leaders like General Leslie Groves, head of the Manhattan Project, and General Carl Spaatz, commander of the U.S. Strategic Air Forces. Both wanted authorization to continue atomic strikes until Japan formally surrendered. Their argument was brutally simple. Every day the war continued. Thousands of American soldiers died in the Pacific. Truman listened, but something in him had changed. After Nagasaki, he told his cabinet, "The thought of wiping out another 100,000 people is too horrible. I can't see any justification for it." It was the first sign that the man who had authorized the world's deadliest weapons was beginning to question the very act itself. Still, even with Truman's growing reluctance, preparations for the third bomb remained in place just in case. The decision could be reversed at any time. All it would take was a single order from the president, and the weapon would be shipped to the Pacific. Then came a moment that few people know about. On August 13th, the bomb's components were being readied for transport when the message arrived: hold everything. It was a direct order to pause the process. Truman had decided to wait for Japan's response to the surrender offer. If Japan refused, the next bomb would go forward. At that moment, the world stood on the knife's edge. The bomb was ready. The plane was ready. The pilots were ready. Only the target and the president's word remained. But behind that decision, there was another, quieter factor shaping Truman's hesitation, one that had nothing to do with Japan. The Soviet Union had declared war on Japan on August 8th, just a day before Nagasaki. Stalin's armies were sweeping through Manchuria, crushing the Japanese Kwantung Army. The Soviets were eager to seize territory and influence in Asia. For Truman, the atomic bomb had been more than a military weapon, it was a geopolitical signal to Moscow, a demonstration of American power in the post-war world. Now, with Japan collapsing and the Soviets advancing, Truman saw no reason to drop another bomb. The message had been sent. The world had seen the power of the atom, and yet the story didn't end there. Even after the surrender on August 15th, the US continued to produce more plutonium cores. The so-called third bomb wasn't dismantled, it was repurposed for testing and future use. Over the next months, Los Alamos scientists refined their designs, improving yields, reliability, and production speed. Within a year, the United States would have a small but growing nuclear arsenal. In secret memos from late 1945, officials discussed how many bombs would be needed in the next war, not against Japan, but against the Soviet Union. One plan called for building hundreds of atomic bombs to neutralize every major Soviet city in the event of conflict. The third bomb had not been dropped, but its legacy had just begun. It became the first weapon of the new era, an age where nations race not for peace, but for supremacy through destruction. For the scientists of the Manhattan Project, the war's end brought a strange kind of emptiness. Some felt relief, others felt guilt. They had accomplished what they were asked to do, but what they created could never be undone. Robert Oppenheimer, the project's scientific director, famously quoted the Bhagavad Gita after witnessing the first test. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Those words haunted him for the rest of his life. As the 1,940 seconds faded into the 1,950 seconds, the secret of the third bomb faded from public memory. Official documents were classified for decades. When they were finally released, historians pieced together the story, the cables, the target lists, the assembly schedules, piece by piece. They discovered just how close the world had come to another atomic catastrophe. The existence of the third bomb remains a symbol, a shadow over history. It represents the razor-thin margin between destruction and restraint, between ending a war and beginning a darker chapter in human existence. But the question still lingers. If Japan hadn't surrendered, if the emperor had delayed his broadcast by just a few more days, where exactly would the third bomb have fallen? And what made Truman finally decide to stop the chain of atomic destruction before it was too late? Because while the world celebrates the end of World War II, few realize how fragile that ending truly was. How close humanity came to crossing one more line it might never have returned from. In the early hours of August 14th, 1945, the war in the Pacific stood on the brink of one final, unimaginable act. The third atomic bomb, the weapon no one talks about, was almost ready to be shipped. Somewhere in a heavily guarded warehouse, technicians worked in silence, unaware that within hours, history would shift forever. On Tinian Island, the B-29 crews of the 509th Composite Group had been briefed to remain on standby. The mood was tense. They'd already seen what the previous missions had done. The glow of Hiroshima still haunted them. The smoke from Nagasaki still drifted in the air. The next order could come at any moment. But then, just before dawn, a coded message arrived. Cease all preparations. President Truman had made his choice. Japan's surrender was expected at any moment, and no further bombs were to be dropped without his explicit approval. For the first time in weeks, the atomic assembly teams stopped their work. The race toward a third detonation, the rush to unleash another firestorm, came to an abrupt halt. It's hard to imagine the weight of that moment. One single decision, one man's hesitation prevented another city from being erased from the map. But Truman's order didn't erase the weapon itself. The third atomic bomb remained partially assembled, its components stored separately. The plutonium core in Los Alamos, the high explosive lenses and casing waiting in transit. The bomb was real, a weapon that could have ended hundreds of thousands more lives, but it became instead a silent symbol of the thin line between war and peace. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito's voice echoed across Japan. Crackling through radios, his words were nearly drowned out by static, but their meaning was unmistakable. Japan had accepted surrender. The war was over. Across the Pacific, in cities scarred by fire, people dropped their weapons, fell to their knees, and wept. And far away, in the desert laboratories and hangars where the next atomic bomb lay waiting, a quiet wave of relief spread through those who had built it. For some, it was over. For others, it was only the beginning, because the third bomb, though never dropped, would shape everything that came next. After the war, the bomb's components were reallocated. The plutonium core, often called the Rufus core, would go on to play a deadly role in the experiments that followed. In late August and September of 1945, Los Alamos scientists began studying how plutonium behaved under different conditions. These were called criticality experiments. They were meant to understand how close materials could come to a nuclear chain reaction before detonation. The same core that might have destroyed another Japanese city soon earned a grim nickname, the Demon Core. Two separate accidents at Los Alamos, one in 1945, another in 1946, killed two scientists, Harry, Daghlian, and Louis Slotin. Both died from lethal doses of radiation after brief, tragic mistakes during experiments with the very plutonium meant for that third bomb. It's a haunting irony the weapon that was spared from being dropped on the city ended up taking lives anyway, within the walls of the laboratory that built it. But beyond its tragic scientific legacy, the third bomb became the seed of something much larger. By 1946, the United States was already manufacturing more nuclear weapons. Truman had authorized continued production. The Cold War was beginning, and with it, a terrifying arms race. Within a few years, the US would have dozens of atomic bombs. By the 1952nd, hundreds. And not long after, the Soviet Union tested its own. What started as a weapon to end one war became the foundation for an era defined by fear, the balance of terror, known as mutually assured destruction. Every major power now sought the same secret that the Manhattan Project had unlocked. Every nation wanted the same devastating leverage that Truman had wielded in 1945. The world's peace was no longer secured by diplomacy, but by the threat of annihilation. And yet, buried deep in that history, there's something profoundly human, a moment of restraint that changed everything. Because make no mistake, the third atomic bomb was going to be used. The orders were written, the crews were ready, and the target city had been chosen. The US military machine was in motion. If Japan's surrender had been delayed by even 48 hours, a third mushroom cloud would have risen into the sky. Imagine it, a third city erased, another 100,000 lives gone. The birth of the nuclear age, not with 2 flashes, but 3. That was how close humanity came to crossing a line that can never be uncrossed. President Truman's final decision not to authorize another atomic strike has been debated for decades. Some say he was moved by conscience. Others argue it was politics or simple exhaustion after years of war. But in truth, it was likely all of these. He had seen the reports. He had read the cables describing burned children, hospitals turned to rubble, and survivors wandering among the dead. He understood that the weapon had done what it was designed to do, and perhaps more than anyone could ever have imagined. When asked later about the bombings, Truman said, "I made the only decision I ever knew how to make. I did what I thought was right." And yet, after Nagasaki, he told his staff, "I don't want to see that thing ever used again." He didn't know it then, but that choice to stop the third bomb would mark one of the most important acts of restraint in modern history. Because in the years to come, there would be moments when leaders faced the same choice he did, whether to press the button, to drop the bomb, to unleash the end of the world. And each time, perhaps unknowingly, they'd be following the shadow of Truman's hesitation, the decision to hold back, even when the power to destroy was within reach. Today, the story of the third atomic bomb remains largely forgotten, tucked between the lines of history books, overshadowed by Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But it is, in many ways, the story that saved us. It reminds us that history isn't only shaped by the things that happen, but by the things that almost happen, by the moments when someone, somewhere, decides not to act. The third atomic bomb was built, it was armed, it was ready, but it never fell. And because of that, for one brief, uncertain moment in August 1945, humanity was given a second chance. A chance to look at what we had done and what we were becoming. A chance to realize that power without limits demands responsibility without end. And a chance, perhaps the last one we'll ever get to, step back from the edge. Even now, decades later, that third bomb remains more than a weapon. It's a ghost, a reminder of how close we came to another inferno, and how restraint in a single instant can change the course of history. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a nation can do is nothing at all.